Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling something really interesting, algorithmic governance.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But basically, we're talking about how algorithms are going from, just tools that governments use to maybe something much bigger, like reshaping how societies actually function. Wild stuff.
Right. So instead of presidents and parliaments, think lines of code making the big decisions. And for today's deep dive, we've got a real mixed bag of sources, articles, research, even some Wikipedia deep cuts. Gotta love those. But the thing that really jumped out at me, AI politicians, is that like a real thing?
It does sound like sci-fi, right? But the roots of this go way back. Long before the internet, even your desktop PC, there was this project in the USSR in the 60s. They called it OGAS.
OGAS. Sounds catchy.
Right. So, OGS, their big idea was this nationwide computer network to manage their whole economy. Basically, a proto-internet, but for central planning. Gather tons of data, analyze it, boom, optimize Soviet economy. Never really got off the ground, tech just wasn't there yet. But shows how long this idea's been kicking around.
So Soviets, decades ago, already thinking this way. Were there any actual attempts back then to like put this into the practice? For real?
Actually, yeah. Jump ahead to the 70s, we find ourselves in Chile, Project Cybersyn. And this wasn't just an idea, this was a real attempt to manage their economy with a computer network.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. Real world example. How did it work? Like, what did Project Cybersyn actually do?
Picture this. Network of computers, all over Chile, getting real-time data from businesses, factories, you name it. This data, it all flowed into a central hub, gave analysts this crazy overview of the entire economy so they could see bottlenecks, make adjustments, all in real time. Kind of like how some big logistics companies work today, but for a whole country.
Wow, so like a real-time economic dashboard for an entire nation. Did it work? Did it do what they hoped?
Some big wins, for sure. One that stands out, it's like something out of a spy movie, happened during this trucker strike in '72, backed by, get this, the CIA. The strikers, their goal was to shut down the Chilean economy. But they didn't account for Cybersyn. The government used the system, got creative, rerouted supplies, optimized their networks, and boom, broke the strike.
Wait, are you serious? A computer network helped break a CIA-backed strike.
You're kidding. That's wild. This isn't just some abstract concept then. This has been having real impact for decades.
Exactly. And fast forward to today, with AI and data analysis light years ahead of where they were, it's not just about economies anymore. We're talking algorithms running cities, maybe even helping choose our leaders. Brave new world out there.
AI mayors. Okay, now that's where things get really interesting. That brings us back to my earlier question. Are AI mayors actually a thing?
Oh yeah, they're out there. That line between sci-fi and reality is getting pretty blurry these days. When we talk about AI mayors, smart cities, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. So these cities, they're using data and algorithms to like supercharge everything, making traffic flow better, even figuring out how to use resources in the smartest way possible. Smart cities, to tracks, using tech to make things more efficient. But isn't there a risk, like giving algorithms this much power? What if something backfires?
Oh, totally. Unintended consequences, that's always a factor. And a good example, this Nevada Smart City project. Ambitious, right? Wanted to change how we live in cities. But they tripped up on something really basic, water rights. Goes to show, even with the fanciest tech, you can't ignore the real world, the need for planning, all that.
Oof, yeah, that's a reality check for sure. Okay, so beyond smart cities, what are some other ways we're seeing algorithmic governance play out, like right now?
Okay, think about this. Reputation systems. So imagine every action you take, every purchase, everything, it all gets factored in, and it affects what you have access to, even your standing in society. A real example, and it's a controversial one, China's social credit system. Now, gotta be careful here. It's way more complex than how it's usually shown in the West.
Yeah, it does seem like China's system gets painted as this like Orwellian surveillance nightmare a lot.
Right. But it's not that simple. It's got all of these different aspects, different goals, different ways it's used. You can't just slap a good or bad label on it. But algorithmic governance, it's not just about social stuff. It's popping up in the justice system too. Algorithms are being used more and more, helping judges figure out sentencing, even navigating the whole messy world of divorce. One example here in the US, the compass system, but it's caused a lot of debate. People worried about bias creeping in.
Makes sense. Algorithmic bias.
Yeah.
Right. If the data going in is messed up, the decisions coming out will be too. Seems like a recipe for making existing inequalities even worse.
Absolutely. You're spot on. And that's why transparency is so important here. If we don't know how these algorithms are making decisions, how can we be sure they're fair? How can we hold them accountable? How do we prevent harm? Big, big questions.
This is all starting to feel like an episode of Black Mirror, not gonna lie. You mentioned algorithms being used in divorce cases. Is that actually happening?
Believe it or not, yeah, it just goes to show how wide-ranging this tech is becoming. Like in Australia, judges are using software to help decide how to split assets in divorce cases. The idea is with data analysis, maybe they can get more objective outcomes, especially when things are emotionally charged, you know?
So from, like, making traffic flow better to helping people navigate divorce, algorithms are becoming a bigger part of our lives all the time. But those AI politicians, I gotta admit, that one's still kind of freaking me out.
It's happening, ready or not. AI Steve ran for UK Parliament recently. In Japan, they've got their AI mayor. Whether this is just a publicity stunt or a sign of things to come, that's the million-dollar question.
Sounds pretty wild. But let's come back down to earth for a sec. What are people saying, like, right now, about the pros and cons of all this? What are they excited about, and what are they worried about?
Okay, so on the one hand, you've got the potential for government that's way more efficient, less corruption because there's more transparency, and decisions about resources are based on actual data. Imagine resources going where they're most needed because an algorithm figured it out, not because of some political deal.
I can see the appeal, for sure. But those concerns about bias and transparency, I can't imagine those are just going to disappear.
Yeah, you're right. They don't. And that's exactly why this conversation is so important. We can't get blinded by the shiny promise of efficiency and forget about the ethical side, the potential downsides. Remember the CRI system in the Netherlands? They wanted to use it to find welfare fraud, but it got shut down. Big concerns about privacy.
Another cautionary tale, it seems. Feels like we're walking a tightrope, huh? Trying to balance the good that this technology could do with the very real risk that it could go wrong. Maybe in ways we haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly. It's a balancing act for sure. And it's a conversation we all need to be a part of. The future of this technology, it's not up to some tech company or government to decide. This will impact all of us. So we all need to be involved in figuring out where we go from here.
Wow, okay. Lots to unpack here. We've gone from Soviet computer networks to AI mayors. This algorithmic governance thing is quite the ride. For our listeners out there, they might be feeling a little overwhelmed. Where's a good place to even start getting a handle on all this?
I think it helps to remember the human side of all this. It's easy to get lost in the tech talk, the what ifs, but really this is about how we as people want to, govern ourselves. These are tools, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, do we use them to make things better, or do we just sort of drift along and let them make decisions for us without us even realizing it?
Is a lot of power to hand over, potentially. Do you think, are people even ready for that kind of shift?
Yeah, public acceptance, that's huge. There was this poll back in 2019, and get this, 25% of Europeans, they said they'd be open to AI leaders. That's not a majority, obviously, but it shows this isn't just some fringe idea anymore.
That is more than I would have guessed, honestly. But even if, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, even if AI did take charge, wouldn't we still need, rules, boundaries?
Totally, yeah. Ethical guidelines, that's got to be part of this for sure. And those guidelines, they can't be made in a vacuum, right? We need open discussion, everyone at the table to figure out what's acceptable, what's not. If we're going to even think about letting algorithms make decisions that affect our lives, those algorithms better reflect what we believe in, not just patterns and data,
What we believe in, not just our data.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. Can't just be about efficiency. It's got to be about, is it actually good?
And even that, right? What's good? That's going to be different for everyone, every culture, every place.
Which just makes this whole thing even more complicated.
Sure.
We're not just talking tech anymore, are we? This is philosophy, ethics, the whole shebang.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation and an important one. And it shouldn't just be happening between tech people and politicians. This is about all of us. We all need to be asking, what role do we want algorithms to play? And what happens if things go right or, wrong? Because that's always a possibility.
Big questions and, no easy answers. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
If algorithms are going to be a part of how our societies work, and it seems like they are, we got to make sure they represent the best of us, not just our digital footprints.
Well said. A lot to think about, that's for sure. And to our listeners, here's something to ponder. If you could design an algorithm, just one, to solve a problem in the world, what would it be? And what would worry you most about actually using it? Keep those brain cells buzzing, and we'll be back next time to dive into another corner of this crazy, complex world we're creating together.